Hello, I am Erica Rose Jeffrey, and I am one of the directors of Dance for Parkinson's Australia. And I am thrilled that as part of our Creating Connections, Sharing Our Stories, a mini online creative aging festival, that we have the pleasure of sitting together in our virtual spaces to have a conversation with Dave Iverson. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation and exploring these ideas of creativity throughout a lifetime. Before going any further, I want to take some time to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all zooming in from today. I am joining from Yagara and Turrbal lands near Meanjin or Brisbane. I want to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and to really honor the incredible power of stories throughout generations to bring us together, to help us to continue learning and to explore new ideas. So thank you all for joining today. I encourage you to use the chat function in the live stream to introduce yourselves. And as we proceed through this session, there'll be an opportunity for you also to add questions as we go. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dave Iverson, who is a former journalist, a writer, a producer, a creative spirit in many different ways. And that it feels like a wonderful connection, even though we're far away on different coasts, that we can be different parts of the world, that we can be joined together today. And through both your documentaries, so in terms of the film medium, but also through the written word, the incredible power of your storytelling, your experiences, sharing your own personal experiences of your journey, your family's journey, but also exploring some of those bigger life questions. So Dave, thank you so much for being with us today. I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erica Rose, for that lovely introduction and that moving acknowledgement of the place where you're speaking from tonight. I really appreciate both of those things. And I'm delighted to be a part of this conference and this conversation today to talk about aging and creativity. It was in the fall of 2007 that I did something I never imagined I would do. I moved in with my 95-year-old mom. She'd been someone who had been able to live independently for many years. But in the fall of 2007, she had a bad case of pneumonia, and it soon became clear that she would no longer be able to live on her own alone. I was a documentary filmmaker and radio host living in San Francisco at the time. My life was very full, but it was also flexible. My mom and I had always been close. And so without a great deal more thought than that, honestly, at the age of 59, I moved back into my childhood home about 30 miles south of San Francisco. But of course, there was so much that I did not know about what lay ahead as a caregiver. I didn't know that caregiving would be so exhausting. I didn't know that it would reveal so many of my inadequacies, including my capacity for frustration and for anger. I didn't know that the Parkinson's disease I'd recently been diagnosed with would actually prove to be less challenging than being a caregiver. And I sure didn't know that after I moved in, my mom would live for another 10 years before passing away at the age of 105. That 10-year caregiving odyssey humbled me, changed me, and reoriented me, perhaps more than any other life experience. It was simultaneously the most challenging thing I had done, but in many ways also one of the most rewarding. And as odd as it may sound, it also turned out to be a particularly creative time in my life. It was during the decade that I was a caregiver that I made the two films that meant the most to me in my filmmaking career. a film about Parkinson's and the latest research surrounding Parkinson's for the PBS Frontline series, and a film about dance and Parkinson's called Capturing Grace. Now, I need to say right off the top that I never would have been able to make those films if I hadn't had help from some extraordinary home healthcare workers who stayed with my mom while I was at work. My caregiving duties were just nighttime and on through the weekend. But I don't really think those are the only reasons that I had such wonderful help that I could make those films. In fact, I don't think it was a coincidence at all that I made those particular films during that time. Yes, caregiving can be exhausting, but there are also moments when you feel like you understand life's purpose in a brand new way. You learn a lot about what matters and what doesn't. You learn that love and tears are almost always intertwined. In fact, you just learn a lot about love. And I think that meant that I was also drawn to trying to tell stories that embodied the sense of discovery and grace and love that people so often experience when they're confronting profound challenge. Stories like the one that's told in the film that some of you may know called Capturing Grace. It's the story about what happened to a group of people who all had Parkinson's when they joined forces with the legendary Mark Morris dance group in New York City to put on a first-of-a-kind performance. Now, to do that, as you all know, you have to really work. Not only that, you have to trust each other. You have to work together, and you have to trust the power of community. As one of the Parkinson's dancers in the film put it, Reggie Butts, "When the music starts," Reggie said, "there are no patients. There are only dancers." I don't think that Reggie was saying that his Parkinson's disappeared when he danced. I think he was saying that his sense of being a patient disappeared. And just as those dancers depended on each other, I would never have made it as a caregiver without the community of women who assisted me. All immigrant Americans, all women of color, all women for whom English was a second or third language. They're the ones who taught me that caregiving at its essence is a physical act of love that must be renewed each and every day. And in so doing, they gave me an incredible gift. They were just there. The experiences I had during that decade also altered my perspective on what it means to get old. I was in my mid-60s when Capturing Grace premiered, and in my early 70s when I finished my caregiving memoir, Winter Stars, an elderly mother, an aging son, and life's final journey, a story generated entirely by that caregiving experience. We know so well that arts programs like Dance for PD unleash creative forces that play a profound role in aging well. But I've come to believe that maybe it also works the other way around, that maybe getting old can play a role in unleashing creativity. Sometimes I think our creative abilities just require a little aging. Here's the last example of what I mean. Part of what I learned as a caregiver is that it's a little like having to be a jazz musician, only one that's unpracticed. Because caregiving is a call and response activity. You have to be nimble and able and willing to improvise, something I was never great at. You have to be fully present to each unfolding moment, which of course is an art in itself. It reminds me of the wisest thing I've ever heard anyone say about living with Parkinson's. And it's what Michael J. Fox once observed about a rule he first learned as an actor. Excuse me. When you're an actor, Fox says, you just have to focus on playing the scene you're in. You have a script, so you know how the story is going to end, but you can't act on that knowledge. You just have to play the scene you're in. It's true as an actor, Fox observes, and it's also true of living with Parkinson's. And I think it's also true of aging and of creating art. We just have to play the scene we're in. And when we do, each moment can become an act of creation. With that, I'll stop, and Erica Rose and I can begin our conversation.
Thank you so much, Dave. What beautiful thoughts, and so much for me to ruminate upon in this moment, and so many sort of different things that I want to explore. I do want to invite everyone to put questions into the chat for the live stream, and we'll make sure to include them into this conversation. But I might start off with a few questions. And so the first one would be around, you mentioned this decision to move in with your mom and to become a caregiver not long after you were diagnosed with Parkinson's. And could you talk a little bit more about why you made that decision? And it seems like a complicated decision. Would love to know more about that.
Yeah. Well, it should have been more complicated. I mean, yeah, sometimes people have put it a little more bluntly, and they've just said to me, what were you thinking? And the truth is, I didn't think about it enough, which this is probably the ultimate rationalization, but I'm glad actually that I did not, because then I'm not sure I would have done it. If I had known all that would lie ahead over the next decade, I'm not sure I would have made that choice. But as I say, my mom and I were really close. We also had a really easy bond. It's not to say I have two brothers, wonderful human beings, and who my mom loved every bit as much, if not more, than me. But we had a kind of easy relationship. I think that made a difference. But the other part of it really does have to do with Parkinson's. My mom was my first example of being a care provider. When she took care of my dad, my late dad, and my late older brother both had Parkinson's too. And it wasn't so much how my mom lived with my dad, it was how she cared for him, and how she did so much for him and with him. And I knew I couldn't replicate that. But when it came time that she needed me, I think there was part of me that felt like, in a way, this is kind of bringing my family's story full circle. My mom had cared for my dad, who had Parkinson's. Now I had Parkinson's, but I was doing really well. It's my turn to care for someone in my family. And so in that sense, it was a way of bringing that story together for me. And while it would be immensely challenging, it was truly so deeply rewarding and so profoundly life-changing that I'm grateful I didn't think about it more.
So you wouldn't go back and give yourself different advice at this point in time?
Yeah, well, sometimes people ask me if I would do this again, and my answer is, I'd like to think I would. I think I would. I would be so much smarter about many things, and I would go into it with my eyes wide open, and I wouldn't make the same mistakes, but I'd make new ones. That's the thing. I mean, every caregiving circumstance is different, of course. And I hope I've learned to be humble enough to think that, okay, I know some things, but I really don't know what lies ahead. And I have to be focused and tuned in and present for that, whatever that turns out to be.
And I think that really struck a chord with me when you were so talking at the beginning about this idea of a jazz improvisation around or the idea of having to be sort of in the flow and respond to the situation at, the context as it is. And just wanted to explore that idea a little bit more, because that's also, it sort of connects to how we react or engage in life, but also how we engage in art in many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about being a caregiver is that it reveals your shortcomings like nothing else. It just pierces you. And so here's an example. I mean, one of my shortcomings is that I like being right about things, and I like explaining to you why I'm right about things. And if you're a care provider, especially if you're living with someone who develops dementia and then that dementia advances, being right is kind of completely worthless, right? So, you have to be present to that person who's in front of you, not the person you'd like her to be, or not the person she once was, but who she is right now in this moment. And I got better at that over time, but way more times than I'd like to remember, I would blow it, or I would say one of the least useful phrases in the English language, "Mom, don't you remember?" And so I think as musicians and artists all do, you learn something about that. You learn it to be better about just being present. And there were times when I think I did that well. There were times when I failed miserably. But I think that's all a part of, in many ways, also the creative enterprise and the creative struggle.
Mm. And as you're speaking, I'm also thinking about my own personal experience with my mother and Alzheimer's, and that journey of being with the person as they are in that moment, and finding the beauty in that, and how that's a creative act unto itself, I think, in sort of that way of engaging with people.
Yeah, part of what I found out, Erica, about that is that, your job as a care provider isn't to correct, it's to comprehend. And it's if someone's words are confusing, to try to understand the truth behind those words, because often there is. My mom once said to me, "David, I just found out that you were married to someone else before you were married to me." And my inadequate response was, "Ma, I'm not your husband, I'm your son." But as I thought about it over time, the truth of the matter was my mom really liked men. She adored my dad, but he'd been gone for 20 years. She didn't really remember him. She still knew she liked men, and I was available. So, it's trying to be present to that truth rather than trying to correct the record.
Mm, mm. And I think that's an interesting element as we're also thinking about stories. And this, the idea of our coming together is about sharing our stories. And so one of the things around art is it's about storytelling. It's about that idea of creating a narrative or sharing a narrative. And could you share a little bit more about what makes a good story and your own approach to telling these stories or those stories?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that it's a story. It's not a topic. It's not an issue. Don Hewitt, the legendary producer of the American television program 60 Minutes, a mini documentary program, once said, "We don't do issues at 60 Minutes. We do stories." So I think remembering that it's a story, and what is it that you want to tell about that story? What makes it important? What makes it resonate with people? And that, of course, is often the subjects of the stories themselves. when I was making that first film about Parkinson's, about my family saga and about Parkinson's research called My Father, My Brother, and Me, that's when I discovered Dance for PD and David Leventhal and his extraordinary program. And so there's a little tiny bit of that in that first film. But I knew from the moment I walked in the door that this was a story that just needed to be told. And I remember feeling like, I'm going to make this happen, come hell or high water. I'm going to make this story happen because it's such a beautiful story. It has extraordinary people. It has the beauty of dance. It has struggle. It has community. It has triumph, and failure. And of course, those all go hand in hand. So I think I was so lucky to be able to make that film with an extraordinary team that worked on it with me. But I think that's the thing to remember, that this is, and to let those people shine, to let those people who have something profound to say, to be right there, and to tell their story. If you can honor that, if you can honor those voices and tell something that will resonate with people, well, that's kind of as good as it gets. And so I think that's what we always try to look for in a story.
In thinking about those stories and also sharing your personal experience of your family's journey, how did you sort of negotiate that in terms of the personal, the public, the vulnerability around that?
Yeah. In that longer documentary called My Father, My Brother, and Me, my mom is actually kind of the star of that film too. But it was a fairly traditional film in that I was the reporter. And yes, I had a personal stake in that story. And I remember early on, the editor at Frontline, I had a beginning that was sort of a traditional beginning. And he said something, I've always remembered this. He said, Dave, people have to care about you before they're going to care about Parkinson's. And so, it turned it upside down, how that film actually began. But in many ways, I think Capturing Grace is a much more personal film, though you don't hear anything from me. I say an opening line of narration, and then you never hear from me again. But it's personal because the people in it are so powerful and so compelling and so revealing about themselves. And I think when I was writing the book about my mom, which I started writing little bits of while she was still living, just taking notes and thinking, not knowing it would become a book, but wanting to write and remember some of what happened. The one thing I knew was that if I was going to write it, I needed to be as candid and honest as I could about that story, and warts and all, and the one thing, the most common comment I get from other caregivers when they've read it is, thank you for being willing to admit that you got angry. Thanks for being willing to admit that there were times when you shouted at your mom, because no one thinks that they're going to shout at someone you love, but you do, or at least I did. And I don't think a story is worth much if it's not honest.
And I really appreciate your honesty and that ability to tell all the aspects of the story, not just perhaps the ones that you want, might be front facing, but what's also happening in that three-dimensionality around it.
Erica Rose, I just had a thought that I'd like to add, if I may,
Sure.
which is about that call and response and sort of the nature of caregiving, that you have to adjust and respond. But that goes both ways. It's always worth remembering that the person you're caring for is adjusting too, and is challenged mightily by their experience because they're not who they once were. And my mom was acutely aware of that often. And so there's a story I tell about how once I got really angry with my mom and she burst into tears. And my response in that moment was to say, go ahead and cry. And then I walked out of the room and I slammed the door and I went and stood in the garage. And I remember hearing the rain falling on the roof and just thinking, what is happening to me? And then walking back in, and I sat down next to my mom. And then I was the one who burst into tears. And she reached out to me, and all she said was, don't cry, David, don't cry. Well, who nailed the call and response, you know?
That's really, I think, beautiful in terms of just the energy that exists in the relationship as you're negotiating a call and response like that. Yeah, beautiful story about your mom and that experience, even while being difficult in that way. So a question in terms of how to put all of these different elements together. And while you were living with your mom and you were making the films you mentioned, but that experience also led you to write your caregiving memoir, Winter Stars. What did you do to find the time and space necessary to do that work, to create the book? And do you think that there's sometimes a danger in trying to do too much, to become so fixated on what you want to accomplish that you neglect other important aspects of your life, including your own health and well-being?
Yeah, totally. Well, for starters, again, I was really lucky. I had these extraordinary women, one of whom was actually from Australia by way of Fiji. I'd actually like to mention their names. Mele Taufa, Sinai Latu, Eileen Khan, and Renette Morales. She was the one non-Pacific Islander from Nicaragua. So they were, they gave me the gift of time, and we became very close. And I learned so much from all of them in so many deep and profound ways. So making those two films, I could go back and forth. I could be at home. I was able to do that. The book, mostly, I kept a journal while I was caring for my mom, and I'd kept a journal most of my adult life. And so toward the end of her life, I started thinking about all that this experience had been and writing little bits, but often, here and there. It really wasn't until the end of her life that I had the space to really write this and turn it into a book. But to your last point about, can you sometimes go overboard? I think the answer to that is yes. Again, I'm incredibly lucky. I continue to do really, really well. The meds still work for me. I've been disciplined about getting exercise, but mostly I'm just really, really lucky to have a version of Parkinson's that's progressing so slowly. But I think there is a real danger, whether it's you have Parkinson's or something else, to feel like you're on the clock and you have got to accomplish certain things. And while I get that, I know that feeling, I think it is important, really important, to be aware of it and to listen to those around you who will tell you, you know what, you're forgetting to go for your daily 2-mile walk or whatever it happens to be. So I think that is, while I think you can continue to be creative and productive well into one of these conditions and well into life, late in life, I think being aware of the pitfalls and being tuned to that, and to have someone, if you're fortunate, as I did, to keep you honest about that, really matters too.
And I think that's a really key point around, in many ways, we're talking about the benefits, the wonders of creativity, of engaging in that practice, but there are also when that passion maybe takes you off course, that could also be a component of it. And just, I really appreciate your honoring of the whole network of people that have been involved in your caring journey, and the honoring of the women who have been part of that story for you, and feel that that's really, as we think about how we want to age in our own lives, but also on society in general, and how are we making that possible to have that kind of shared support in whatever way it might happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't have survived without the women who I've mentioned. They were so incredibly wise. I've often said that if I fell flat on my face, they lifted me up. If I struggled, they just admired that I was trying. And we became close friends. We'd stay up late at night talking about our lives and loves and family. And we remain connected to this day, which I'm really grateful for as well. And it's something that, in this country at least, demands much more respect than it currently receives. According to the Brookings Institution, in the year 2019, the average home healthcare worker in the United States made $12 an hour. It's better than that where I happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area. But we need to do so much more to honor that profession, to support that profession, and to prepare for getting old. Someone turns 65 every 8 seconds in the United States. And we are so not ready for the consequences of that.
Yeah, I think how we think of it for ourselves, but also how it ripples out into the community. I see there's a question from the live stream, so I might just ask that one. So from Nicole, it must have been difficult for your mom going from caregiver to care receiver. Was that anything, did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, great question. Well, she had after my dad died, my mom lived independently for 13 years, and she was a dynamo. She was engaged in everything. And so nothing stopped her until pneumonia. And even then, she would read. She was a passionate sports fan. She's very engaged in politics. So she's remained really, really engaged. One of her strengths, actually, was that what mattered to her was the end goal, which was to stay engaged, which she did from the time she was 95 until just past 100. She remained incredibly engaged and active until dementia really took over. And I think during that time, she just felt like, well, if I need a walker, if I need a wheelchair, I don't care, so long as I can get there. I think to her, she was sort of like, well, if my son wants to come down and live with me, well, why not? Why wouldn't he? So unlike a lot of people who resist care, she was perfectly happy to have a supporting cast. And that's actually a really good thing. And we had a really great rapport that carried us through some really difficult times, and some times when I'm not proud of how I was. But that was really a sustaining power, I think, for both of us.
Some of the pictures that you can see through your website and connected to the book of your mom are really fantastic, and you can even see her spirit coming through those photos.
Yeah, she had. Yeah, Eileen once described her, one of our caregivers, as a ball of fire. There was a lot of light and spark that emanated from her, and And for that reason, she was incredibly charming and engaging, and she could also be dangerous.
So I just want to, something you mentioned at the start of our conversation, which sort of is, I've been thinking about as we're talking, is this idea that I'm not going to sort of rephrase it exactly the way, but sometimes you need to age in order to be creative, or the aging sort of unlocks or opens up your creativity or one's creativity. And curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about actually since you asked me to be part of this conference, Erica Rose. That we know so much, as I was trying to say about how important creativity to aging is. Dance for PD, of course, being exhibit A for that phenomenon. But I started thinking about, well, can it happen the other way around? Can age, help unlock creativity? And that's part of why I don't think it was a coincidence that these events that meant so much to me professionally were happening at this time in my life. I think caregiving is also really intimate, so it's physical. And so I just think you're just right at the cross currents of what matters in life. And so I think you can maybe absorb more of that, take more from that, learn more from that at a certain point in life. My timing was not accident. It was accidental, but not accidental. And by that, I mean, of course, it happened when it happened. I happened to be 59. But if my mom had gotten sick when I was 39 or 49, I don't think I would have done it. And if it happened when I was 69, I don't think I could have done it. So, it was fortuitous in that way. But I also think I was open, maybe, or was cracked open, maybe more accurately, by the experience in a way that allowed certain creative instincts to also come through, to try to honor stories like the people in Capturing Grace, but also the stories that emanated from my time with my mom. I just think maybe that's possible, that there is such a thing as the wisdom of elders, perhaps. I'm by no means there yet, but I don't know. I just think that's worth thinking about more, about whether it's not only creativity that's useful to age, but maybe aging is useful to creativity.
It made me think about an article in the New York Times I read years ago, which was talking about how this idea of people having their most creative period of life after they're 70. And it interviewed a number of individuals. And I found that was really fascinating and perhaps highlighting this or connecting to this idea about maybe being in the flow or being sort of cracked open in different ways to be more willing, open, whatever it might be in that particular situation to explore. So I think it's interesting that we're talking about creative aging, but also that idea that perhaps age allows more creativity, and that it's exciting to look at it from both ways.
I think so. I also think, though, it's probably worth our underlining that there's a lot of good fortune in that, I'm at a place in life and have a degree of comfort that makes me extraordinarily privileged. So I don't want to be too blithe, too light and airy about this, because I think there, if you're old and you're hungry or you're homeless or you're challenged or you're dealing with really difficult stuff, well, then your work is right there in the middle of that. You're not maybe going to be, so I don't want to be too casual in what I'm trying to say, but I do believe that if there is that possibility, at least if we're fortunate enough to be in a position to experience.
And maybe I think as you're sort of highlighting perhaps, and actually this is connecting to a question that's just come through around perhaps having the time and space and financial security sort of allows a feeling of having less to lose. Would that?
Totally. Totally. I mean, here's an example. The reason why I could have caregivers there during the day so that I could go to work and then I'd take over when I came home in the evening and through the night and on the weekend. The reason we could do that and pay for that care, which is quite expensive here in the San Francisco Bay Area, is primarily for one reason. And that's because my parents bought a home in Menlo Park, California, in what would become the heart of Silicon Valley in 1950 for $15,000. Now, by the time I moved in 2007, moved back to my childhood home, that house was worth just a little bit more, than that. And that meant I could borrow against it again and again and again and again to pay for that care. Mm. So that's just good fortune. That's all that is. It's not exactly a national elder care plan, I mean, it can't just be that, well, so long as your parents bought a home in Menlo Park in 1950, you'll be just fine. That doesn't go very far as a national care plan. That's what we have to focus on and think about. Getting loving care, as I believe my mom received, shouldn't be because you're lucky, shouldn't be because you have good fortune. It should be what we do to accompany our oldest citizens in life's final journey. And we have so far to go, at least in this country, to make that a reality.
Definitely. And I think we see that in many places in the world and as well. Just one final question before we wrap up. So I know that you're now working on a new film, which also has to do with art and creativity and challenges, and also a link that I have as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that film?
Yeah, sure. It was such a delight to learn that you were a good friend of the person who this film is largely about, Hadley Ferguson, who is an immensely talented artist living in Missoula, Montana, and who I've known for, 7 or 8 years through our mutual connection to the Parkinson's community, although Hadley now has a diagnosis of multiple system atrophy. Hadley called me up a year ago or so and said, Dave, I'm thinking about this, and my friend Catherine is writing something that I think is going to become a book, and you think it might be a film. And I was so sure when I finished Capturing Grace that would be my last film, and I felt like, I love this film, I love Capturing Grace. Filmmaking is really freaking hard. Do I want to make another one? No, I do not. Thank you very much. There are other things I want to do. But Hadley calls, and Hadley. And so I just felt like, she's just this extraordinary person. And if I could help make that a short film about her real, then yeah, I do want to do that. So, here we are again. But as you know well, she is an extraordinary person, as is her dear friend, Catherine Armston, who's also part of the film. And I'm lucky to now be working on that.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that the ways of having that creativity come together, even while telling challenging stories, I think is really important in how we all share our humanity. And so thank you for continuing to be such an excellent, profound, thoughtful storyteller, and to help to share those stories in many different ways.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I feel like we could probably sit together and have talk for hours, but we do need to wrap up for today. And so I just want to say just a really big thank you to you, Dave, for joining us today for our Creating Connections, Sharing Our Stories events. And thank you for sharing the work that you're currently doing. For everyone who's watching, if you haven't checked out the book that Dave was mentioning, Winter Stars, we do have links to it in the program platform, but we'll also share some further information about that as well.
Thank you, Erica Rose. Great privilege to be with you today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And just to wrap things up for today, we've had an amazing first day for our mini online festival. Encourage you, if you missed any sessions, they'll be available as videos on the ArtsFront platform. And tomorrow our session starts at 12:30 AEST, Australian Eastern Standard Time. So I will entrust you to calculate the time difference for yourselves, but look forward to you joining us tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.